Hi everyone, Cecilia Martinez here, Community Lead at Replay. Thank you for joining us for today's April 15th Replay Office Hours. So if this is your first time at Office Hours, just to kind of give a quick overview of what we chat about, I go through the changelog review, so some of the recent changes that we've made to the product, some of the things that we've been working on. Then I also like to spend some time talking about things that are coming up on our roadmap. And I also like to do a debugging example. So we'll dig into an actual replay, talk about a real bug that was fixed this week in the replay app using a replay to demonstrate. So if you have any questions, feel free to post those in the chat. All of these are recorded, so you can also review them at any time on our Twitch page at twitch.tv/replayo. You can also join us in our replay Discord at replay.io/Discord. Our entire team works in Discord in public, so you can follow along with some really interesting chats about how we're designing replay, how we're working on the code, and everything in between. So great. So to get started this week, I'd actually like to kick things off with a couple of shout outs. So this week we had some open source contributions to our replay dev tools. So the front end of the replay debugger, the dev tools that you use in order to open replays, view them, debug them, add comments, that is all open source. And so if you're interested in contributing to open source, which is something that we've talked about on the stream recently, actually, we do make that possible for you. We can help you out. We can answer any questions that you have. But I wanted to give a shout out to two contributors this week. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over here and share my screen. And so the first, we wanted to say thank you to, at AO Johnny, I believe is how you never really know how to pronounce Twitter usernames. But yeah, so this contribution came through this week, and it was essentially to use a shared trial end component using some custom styles. So thank you for that. That got approved and was merged in. And then I do wanted to kind of point out that Gerald recorded a replay of the actual fix working. So thank you so much to Jonathan for that. And then also Ashwin posted that they did their first open source contribution to replay. So super, super honored to be this is your first contribution, and wanted to take a look at that. So this is a fix that we actually had an issue with getting the system color scheme preference for dark mode. So I talked about recently how we now have multiple options for dark mode, not just light and dark, but then also you can mirror your system configuration. So there was a small bug with that, and I shouldn't say small bug. There was a bug with that, and Ashwin came in, fixed that, and thank you. So thank you so much for that contribution. Like I said, if you're interested in contributing, the front end is open source. We do have issues that are marked as good first issue. So these are issues in our DevTools repository, and I can go ahead and pop this link into the chat as well. These are issues that are good if it's the first time that you're contributing to Replay. And so you can check those out. You'll notice that some of them also have this label that says has replay. So one of the things that we talked about recently on this stream and then in our blog is that contributions to open source don't have to be code changes. You can also help by adding replays to bug reports. So for example, we have some bugs here, some issues that don't have corresponding replays. So if you're able to reproduce that issue, get a replay recorded, add some comments, kind of get things started in the right direction, that is really, really helpful for the developer that eventually ends up fixing that bug. So that's also a good way that you can help contribute as submitting reproducible bug reports with replays. But these are all good first issues that you can check out. As I mentioned before, you can also join us at replay.io/Discord if you do have any questions as you're working through the code base, getting up and running. But yeah, we'd love to see you and let us know how we can make that process better if you did run into any questions, and we can update any of our documentation. So great. Yeah, so thank you, you two, so much for your contributions this week, and hopefully we see more from you. So yes, let's go ahead and get into changelog review. The first thing that I wanted to cover is 10-minute replays. So we talked about this on a previous stream that we were introducing an experimental setting that allows you to support recording longer recordings. So currently we recommend that you keep replays to 2 minutes or less, shorter the better, in order to prevent performance issues. We had this experimental setting that you could only open with a keyboard shortcut. You had to hit shift like 9 times in order for this option to even appear. But now we've released it for alpha. So if you are interested in checking that out, in the settings in your replay library, so app.replay.io, or you can also open the settings from any replay itself, and you go to experimental tab here. This is where you can turn on experimental settings. And so there is a little warning here, a disclaimer, that there's an increased chance of session errors and performance issues. But you can, if you check that out, try recording some longer replays up to 10 minutes and letting us know how that works for you and any issues that you come across. I did want to say that because of this change and because some of the work that we've been doing to support longer replays, you may have seen an increase in any errors over the past week or so. We have pushed a fix for that. So if you upload your replay browser to the most recent version, then you should see an improvement there in any kind of errors that you were hitting. So we appreciate your patience and your understanding as we're rolling out these kind of new features that allow us to better the product. And you can always reach out to us at support@replay.io or in our Discord if you run into any bugs or any problems, and let us know and we can work with you on those. So. But 10-minute replays, if you think about being able to record entire workflows for product validation. If you think about if you know you have a bug and you're trying to reproduce it, but you don't necessarily know exactly what causes it, you can start recording, play around, reproduce the issue, and then it's captured and you don't have to try and go in and then start replay after the fact. So we think this will be a really great workflow improvement. We've heard that from a lot of users that they would like to be able to make longer recordings. So definitely let us know what you think. So the next thing that I want to talk about is this is something that's actually part of a larger keyboard accessibility project. So I'm going to pull up a replay, and this is a replay we're going to take a look at a little bit later. But so this is a replay, and then when you kind of are probably familiar, there's two main modes in replay. There's viewer, which allows you to view the replay recording, the video in kind of this really big view. You can add comments. And then there's also DevTools mode. So we have some keyboard shortcuts. And the keyboard shortcuts right now, some of them are specific to DevTools mode and some of them are specific to viewer mode. So here's kind of in our documentation under our DevTools reference page, we do have the keyboard shortcuts. And you can see that a lot of them have this note that it's only in DevTools mode or only in breakpoints. And so there are certain things that we've kind of realized that to improve accessibility, we can make available from viewer without breaking things in DevTools. And so we want to be as accessible as possible. So as part of this larger accessibility project, one of the first things that we're doing is identifying which keyboard shortcuts that we can use in both modes. And so we have this Command P, which opens file search. So this lets you go to a specific file. So if we had a toggle component, view toggle, you can hit Command P, you can type it, and then you can hit enter or you can click on it to in order to open up that component. So previously this only worked in DevTools mode, but now if you are in viewer mode, so if you're already in this view and you haven't quite toggled over to DevTools yet, you can search for a file here. You can search for the component, you can hit enter, and that's going to automatically take you over to DevTools and take you over to that file. So it's just going to allow you to have more shortcut accessibility depending on no matter what view that you're on. And again, this is kind of the first part of many changes that will be coming to improve keyboard shortcuts and accessibility. Just to kind of give you a little bit, and you'll see this chat in our Discord if you go into the development and the design channels. But as you can see in DevTools, there is a lot of focus areas. You can be clicked into the console. You can be, into a source where you can move a cursor around. You can be in a comment where maybe you're replying to something. So there's a lot of different areas that you can kind of, if you're tabbing through and if you are, depending on where you're focused, that keyboard shortcuts and that kind of work can be a little more complex. And so that's something that we are working through to improve that experience. And on that same note, one of the improvements that was made this week is to the keyboard shortcuts or the within the React dev tools. So the node picker now has a loading tooltip, but then also keyboard navigation is more reliable now when you're in React dev tools. So that's another change that was made this week. And then last but not least, the network monitor. Now when you select a stack trace frame, it'll navigate to the source code and then also take you to that moment in the pause panel call stack. So just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to go ahead and just close these sources out just to give you the full experience here. So in the network tab, obviously, I have all of our network requests. This is where we're paused right now. But if I go ahead and fast forward to this GraphQL response here, or this network request. So a couple of things happened. We saw that it opened up the source file that actually initiates this request. It's in our create http link.js, and it goes to that file, that line of code. And so here we can see that this executes 34 times. We could start to debug from here. And then it also went to that point in the replay, and we saw the DOM actually change in the viewer here. So this is, allows you to just kind of get from one point to another with debugging. A lot of things that we hear, it would be nice to be able to jump from an event right into the source code, or jump from a component render right into the source code. And so, yeah, so now you can do that with network requests. You can highlight a network request in the trace. You can go right to the source code and start debugging. So yeah, let us know what you think about that and if that's helpful for you, and what other areas that you'd like to see in order to improve that debugging workflow. All right, so I'm just going to check the chat and see if there's been any questions. Okay, great. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat, and then so we'll just keep rolling along here. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about is a couple of things that we're working on and a couple of announcements that I wanted to make. So first things first, I do want to welcome a new member to the team. So we have made a lot of really had a lot of really exciting people join the team recently. This is another one. So I'm just going to share this Twitter post here on my screen. And so Oliver de Albuquerque is joining Replay. He joined this week, and he comes from the Chromium dev team at Google, where he kind of worked on the partnerships team there for Chrome. And so we're really excited to have him on the team in order to help with our efforts around how we can better, serve our users in the go-to-market side, and then, how we can also support enterprise organizations. But so yeah, so if you may see him in the Discord, if you have any feedback on what kind of integrations that you might like to see, or how we can improve certain workflows or on product offerings, definitely I know that he would love to chat with anybody that's using Replay, and feel free to say hi. So welcome, Oliver. I also, on our roadmap insights, one of the things that we've been talking about a lot recently is obviously React and Redux dev tools. So Mark Erickson has been working a lot on a Redux dev tools in Replay integration. He talks about this a lot, which is great. I'd love to see him talking through the problems that he's solving and working in public. And so in our Discord, he's very active. And then you can also kind of follow along on Twitter. So he was made a tweet earlier this week, and I just want to, yesterday, I wanted to share. He's kind of been working on that Redux DevTools extension work. He has to modify Replay's custom Firefox fork. And so, was able to get that up and running. But I'd recommend giving him a follow on Twitter, asmart, with an E at the end, and because he definitely does a lot in terms of sharing his work in public, and you can stay up to date on how that work is going for Redux DevTools. And then just another note kind of for Mark specifically, he will be speaking at Typescript Congress next week, April 29th. So Friday, April 29th, giving a talk on lessons from maintaining TypeScript libraries. So Typescript Congress is a conference. It's a virtual conference coming up, like I said, April 29th. You can go to typescriptcongress.com to find out more information and to register. There will be some free workshops, there's speakers, and so you can definitely catch Mark along as well as many other 16 other speakers talking about TypeScript specifically. So we use TypeScript here at Replay. We obviously did do a lot of kind of work, try to work with that as well. We actually did a blog post recently about debugging TypeScript using Replay Node. So if you are interested in TypeScript and you use it, I definitely want to check that out and gain some of the insights that Mark can share. So a couple of other things that I want to talk about on the product side as far as roadmap insights goes. So one of the things that we are bringing on is sharing Replay as a video. So that is something where we do have a prototype for that. So what this means is that instead of so right now you can share a URL to the replay. The replay is this debuggable asset that you can view the recorder, you can view the video here in this viewer mode and you can play it. We have had some requests for it to be able to just export the video portion of the replay to share it as a video that can be shared or downloaded even. So if you are using Replay as a visual medium in order to share the runtime of the UI, and you don't need access to the dev tools, that's something that's been requested. So we do have a prototype of this working of being able to share Replay as a video. So we're continuing to work on how we can better support this and introduce it as a feature coming up. So if this is something that's interesting to you, let us know. If you have any feedback on how you'd like that feature to work, we definitely would love to hear that. So, and then the next is some improvements to our Playwright Recorder. So we've talked about this before, very exciting, the ability to record automated Playwright tests in CI so that if a test fails, you already have a recording of that test failure that can be debugged so that you can fix those failures fast and then move along with your release. And then also have these kind of recorded assets that you can analyze over time to understand why your tests are failing, why they're flaky, and make improvements to that. So we're kind of working right now on some next iterations of how we can improve our Playwright Recorder. We have already added a GitHub action that will automatically upload failed recordings. And we, basically have allowed you to be able to configure it to use your existing Playwright test code. All you're doing is swapping out the Replay browser. So some of the things that we are improving now is being able to record tests in parallel. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That's something that has come up before. And then the other is improving the comment bot that Replay Playwright adds. So right now on a pull request, this is an example here, the GitHub action will post the failed test with kind of these links to these replays that have the name of the test and says that it's failed. So we're making some improvements to the information that gets posted here in the comment to have a better experience there and to get maybe a little bit better context or understand what's happening with that failed test. So yeah, so keep an eye out for that. Those are all kind of our roadmap insights that are taking place. All right, so before we move on to the debugging session, just gonna check for any questions. All right, great. So this is a fun one this week. We're actually going to be posting a blog about this next bug that we're going to be taking a look at. So our engineer, Josh Morrow, fixed a bug this week around our hover tooltip. So you may have noticed some issues with this recently, and he was able to record a replay of the issue, use it to debug, and then push a fix. And we wanted to kind of share this story because it involves something that can happen quite a bit with React applications. Recently, I did a talk for React ATL about debugging React applications. And one of the things that we talked about is that the use of React hooks can sometimes lead to certain categories of bugs. And if you are able to identify certain categories of bugs over time, it can make it easier to debug your own applications because you can be familiar with those specific patterns and know how to approach things. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at that today. So the first thing I want to do is kind of, I'm going to drop a link to the pull request here in the Discord. I'm sorry, in the Twitch. All right, so this is the pull request that we're taking a look at. So this was fixed. It was merged, and so this changed the hover handler upon source ID changing. All right, so let's dig into the replay and take a look at what that means. So this is the replay that we're going to be taking a look at today, and I'm going to play through so you can see what's going on here. I'm going to go ahead and start it here. And so in the beginning, everything works fine. So replay will show you the number of times a line of code hits whenever you hover over it. So I can even show you what that looks like here in this replay. We can use replay to debug replay. So as I'm hovering over the lines of code in this source file, we can see 34 hits, we can see 0 hits. So that is a feature of replay. It kind of shows you how many times that the line of code has executed. And so what's happening now in this replay here, it's working initially. We just saw that it was showing the line of code. And then as it's going through, so then Brian Hackett from our engineering team, he clicks on a comment, and what that does is it automatically opens up a new source file. So I'm sorry, he clicks on the call stack, and the call stack, it opens up the next version of the next line in that call stack, which opens up a new source. And so here we can see as he's hovering over, it's just kind of stuck in this loading stage. So no matter what line he hovers over, instead of that nice crisp fast experience of returning the number, it's loading, and it's always loading. It doesn't ever actually show the number of hit counts for that line. So that is a bug, right? We don't want that to happen. We want you to be able to see how many times it's hit and have that experience. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's going on here. So I like to follow a very kind of a specific debugging process. And so I'm going to walk through that in the same process that I like to follow. The first is, having a reproducible example. So we do have that here. We have the replay. We're able to see what's happening with the application and that it's not working. The next thing that I like to do is to understand what is working supposed to look like. And this replay is great because we have both in one. We have a working example and we have a non-working example. So we were able to see in the beginning of the replay that when he hovers over the line of code, it does work initially. So we can see here at this point in time, 117 hits, that's working. And so in our dev tools, there's actually a comment, a really helpful comment here that we can look at, but it's this line here, which is update breakpoint hit counts. And so you can see the comment here is that this line is hit twice around the 16-second mark, which aligns with that first time that we're calling in order to get the breakpoint hit counts. And so if we open this up, we can see it hits 2 times, and we can see the moments in time that it hit, and we can see kind of the DOM update, and we can see that that's around the same time that we was getting the hit breakpoint hit counts earlier on in the replay. This does not fire again any other time in the replay later on, but it's supposed to. We're supposed to be getting more breakpoint hit counts when we open up that new file, and and when we want to understand how many times that each line of code has executed. So we have an understanding of what's supposed to be firing, and it's not. So we've been able to see what working looks like. We know that it's not working later on in the replay, and we see that there are certain lines of code that aren't executing also later on in the replay. So that gives us kind of a bit of a starting point. And if you're familiar with a code base, right, you kind of understand where certain lines of code are executing and what's going on. And so Josh, because he built out this feature, the code heat maps, being able to see when how many times a line of code hits, he's able to kind of know that we're in that line number tooltip component. So the tooltip, the little on hover that pops up, again, when you're in DevTools, we can see it here. It's at 57 hits, 38 hits. that is the component that we're working in. So line number tooltip is the component here. And within this component, there is a function called set hovered line number. So that is essentially what is setting that 57 hits, that 48 hits, 71 hits. So this function is defined inside the line number tooltip. And we can see that there is a set breakpoint hit counts function here, and that's hit 38 times. That's hit every single time that we hover. So this function is executing correctly, at least at the right times. We can see on the every time that we're kind of skipping through each instance, we can see in the DOM up top in our loading view here, and I can make this a little bit bigger so we can see in the video here, as I rewind, as I fast forward, every single time I'm scrolling through, the tooltip is loading. We're setting the breakpoint hit counts, but it's never actually showing a number in any of these last ones. And so here it is, like, right, 0 hits, 117 hits. These are the correct fires, but the rest of them aren't. And so we can kind of try and figure out why. So I am going to add, I'm going to log. So we have the source ID and then the line number is what we're passing through to this dispatch, this set breakpoint hit counts. So I'm going to go ahead and log that out to the console. So we're going to do source.id, and we're going to do line number, and we're going to save. Okay, so we can see here, again, the working ones. We have source ID 0706. And as we're kind of scrolling through the entire, all of the logs, even the ends, the interesting thing is that the source ID does not change. So here we are in the analysis manager file, right? Here we're in the event listeners.js file, but the source ID is the same, and it shouldn't be. It's supposed to change whenever the source changes. That source is, when I say source, I'm referring to the file. And so that's something going wrong there. So the source ID is not changing even though we have changed the source. So what's happening is because the source ID is not changing, we are not actually requesting the hit counts, the line hit counts for that new file. So we can see here, this is where we actually get that source actor breakpoint hit counts. And again, the ID for the 41 hits here is always going to be the same. This is get value. And we can hover over this kind of all of these instances here. And we can see that the get value, if we were the same thing, if we were to log the ID. And we have autocomplete in the console, so it'll go ahead and know that yes, ID is a valid value that you can log. Again, we're seeing that the source ID does not change. And so that's never actually going to dispatch what we need. I'm going to go ahead and remove that print statement. And then so let's go back to our tooltip component. So to comment here, so we've changed sources. We actually get the source earlier in this same file here on line 89. So we have const source equals use selector get selected source. So I'm going to go ahead and on the next line, I'm going to log what source is. So whenever you open up a print statement on a line, it's actually opening it or starting the breakpoint at the beginning of the line. So because we're defining source here, it's not going to be defined at that moment in time. We actually want to log it on the next line. So I'm going to go ahead and the next line here, I'm going to log source.id. And again, with our autocomplete, we can see that yes, that is a valid variable to log. And just go ahead and log that to the console. So we can see here 0706, that is the correct source in the beginning, 0706, these are all matched up. So here's where we start to see a mismatch. So line number tooltip which is kind of on this line here, line number tooltip, is showing a source ID of 0510, that's the correct source. It does change. So here it changes from 0706 to 0510. So when we're declaring source here, it's getting the correct source. But inside of our function later on here, set breakpoint hit counts, the source ID continues to be 0706. So you see this mismatch here of 0510 and 0706. So that's the problem, essentially, is that we've changed sources, but this function doesn't know it. And so I've been able to isolate the issue, and now we can kind of trace that down to a root cause. That's the next step in a debugging process. So what's going on here? So whenever you kind of see a value that appears to be stuck, or it's not updating when you would expect it, it seems stale, or it's holding on to a previous value, one of the things that you want to check for is something called a closure. So when you define a function in JavaScript, you create what's called a closure. This means that the value when the function is defined is what the value is inside that particular function definition. So it kind of wraps everything up inside of that specific definition of that function. And so if you want to read more about closures, I'm going to pop a link here in the chat. This is something that kind of, when you think about scope and closures in JavaScript, you want to think of essentially everything gets bundled together or enclosed closure it's inside of that function definition. So, when we have this kind of source ID that is being used, when the function is declared, that is the value of that source ID. And so this function is being run again, or defined again when the component is rendered. But the key issue here is on line 141. Here we have a useEffect hook. So useEffect is a hook within React that allows you to essentially do some kind of side effect when based on inside the component. So it's configurable to so it can run or it cannot run on every render depending on how you configure it. So in this is kind of configurable based on the second parameter, which is this empty array. So where you have a useEffect hook here, where we're saying that the editor code mirror, we are saying every time that the line mouse enters, we want to run this set hovered line number function. So we're assigning the execution of that function to the code mirror hook inside of this useEffect. So what's happening is that this useEffect hook, because we're passing an empty array, we're saying run it once when the component mounts, and then don't run it again unless the component remounts. And so every time the component is rendering, this function, set hovered line number, it's a top level function. So this function is being redefined, but the assignment for it, set hovered line number, is only running once. So we're creating another closure inside of this useEffect hook, which is an anonymous function declaration. So it is a function declaration which creates a closure. So the assignment of set hovered line number is always going to have that initial value of the source ID unless it remounts. And this component is not remounting in between the source ID changing. So what we really want to do is we want to say every time that the source ID changes or the source changes, we need to re-execute this hook to ensure that we have the most up-to-date version of this function, including the most up-to-date version of its parameters, one of which is the source ID, right? And so that is what the fix does. So if we, again, kind of go back to the pull request, and here it is. Change the hover handler upon source ID changing. And we take a look at the files that were changed. We can see here that what we're doing is we are wrapping this set hovered line number function inside the useEffect hook. And then we're also changing the second parameter of this hook so that if code heat maps dispatch editor.codeMirror, which is the kind of hooks that we're using here for on line mouse enter and line mouse leave, or source. So we've added source to the array and the second parameter of the useEffect hook. That means that anytime the source changes, this hook will run again. It'll redeclare set hovered line number function, and it'll redeclare it with the new source ID, the new source value. So that is an example of a bug that can happen pretty commonly depending on how you are using your useEffect hooks. And so there's something to keep in mind with the useEffect hook is that it is configurable. So it may run, it may not run, depending on how you've configured it. So if you expect it to run and it doesn't, that can cause issues. If you don't expect it to run and it's running a bunch of times, that can also cause issues because you can use something like um, in React DevTools, for example, to see how many times something has mounted, or or how many times a line of code is executed in replay, for example. And if that's running more than you expect it to, or unnecessarily, that can cause performance issues, right? And so, or other unintended consequences. So being very conscientious of when you need a useEffect hook to run, what are the dependent values that it uses, and if those change or not, if you need it to rerun. And then understanding when a component will mount and remount in order to understand that that's also when the useEffect hook will run again. So hopefully that was an interesting example for you. It helps you maybe better understand how you can debug React hooks errors in the future. And like I said, we'll be posting that blog post today. You can check out the replay example. It's posted in the pull request that I did link in the chat. So you can check that out. You can look through the comments, dig through the code, see it for yourself here. So yeah, that's an example of how you can use replay to debug your React application. We are going to be talking a lot more about how you can use replay to debug React applications coming up in May at Reactathon. So replay is going to be a sponsor at Reactathon. We will be having a couple of speakers there. I'll be doing a talk, so is Mark Erickson. And then you can also join myself, Mark, Brian, and Jason, and the rest of the more of the team at Reactathon, the in-person event in early May. So again, that is reactathon.com. There is a free remote event coming up here at the end of April. And then you can also join the in-person event in the Bay Area in May. And we will be there for both of them. So you can learn more about how to debug React applications with replay at that event. So awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in this week. That's what I have for you. And we will be back next week. We are also looking into expanding where we stream. So definitely keep an eye out for that. Hopefully we'll have that together for you next week. Also hoping to get together some functionality to have guests on the stream as well. So those are 2 improvements that we're making soon. So, tell all your friends, subscribe to us on Twitch, and check back next week. But thanks again, and happy debugging. Cheers, everyone.